The hardest lesson I learned after 43 years of marriage wasn't about love. It was about trust. The people who hurt you the most rarely come from outside your life. They usually carry your last name. My name is Robert Whitmore. I'm 70 years old, and I've spent nearly my entire life around boats. As a boy, I dreamed of owning one. As a man, I built a business that helped thousands of families enjoy life on the water. What began with one rented dock, an old folding table, and a coffee can filled with screws eventually became Whitmore Marine Group, a company operating 4 full-service marinas along the shores of Lake Michigan, along with a workshop where skilled craftsmen still build wooden boats by hand, because some traditions deserve to survive. None of it would have meant anything without my wife, Margaret. I built the company. She built the life that made every long day worthwhile. 9 months ago, everything changed. It was an ordinary Sunday morning. I woke up expecting coffee, breakfast, and another quiet day together. Instead, I found Margaret lying on the kitchen floor. The doctors said it was a brain aneurysm. No warning, no symptoms. The woman who had been laughing beside me the night before was simply gone before our morning coffee ever had a chance to cool. At the time, I believed losing my wife would be the greatest pain I would ever experience. I had no idea something even worse was waiting. The one piece of Margaret I still felt connected to rested inside our boathouse behind our shore of Door County, Wisconsin. It was a beautifully restored 1959 Century Resorter, finished in polished mahogany with chrome that gleamed in the sunlight. 25 years earlier, Margaret had bought what most people considered nothing more than a rotten wreck at an estate auction for $400. Everyone laughed. She ignored every one of them. Over the next 25 years, she slowly brought that boat back to life with her own hands. She hunted down original hardware from forgotten salvage yards. She carved replacement wood from oak she had seasoned herself. She stripped away layer after layer of old varnish, using nothing but patience, determination, and language that always made me laugh. She named the boat Faith. Nobody else ever called it that. Around town, it was simply known as Margaret's boat, because everyone understood exactly who had given it a second life. Since losing her, I visited that boathouse almost every morning before heading to work. I'd sit inside the boat with a cup of coffee and breathe in the smell of cedar, varnish, and old wood. Somehow, it still felt like she was there. It was the only place where missing her hurt just a little less. Then, one Monday morning, everything changed again. Coffee still in my hand, I unlocked the boathouse and stepped inside. I froze. The lift was empty. The cradle where Faith had rested for more than 20 years held nothing except damp marks and clean concrete where the boat had recently been sitting. The boat was gone. For a few seconds, I honestly couldn't think. Then my mind raced toward theft. Except nothing had been forced open. The doors were locked, no broken windows, no damaged hinges. Even stranger, the security camera watching the dock showed absolutely nothing, until late the previous night when the recording suddenly stopped. Someone had deliberately disconnected it. Someone who already knew exactly where everything was located. Only 3 people had access to that boathouse. Me, our longtime caretaker Luis Moreno, who happened to be on a fishing trip with no phone service, and my only son. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. I would soon discover there wasn't. Once the shock faded enough for me to think clearly, the pieces started fitting together. Ethan owned a heavy-duty boat trailer. He knew our private launch ramp better than anyone. He had his own key to the boathouse. He wouldn't have needed to force a single lock. He could have backed his trailer down before sunrise, loaded Faith, pulled her out without leaving any damage behind, and driven away long before the neighbors were awake. The more I thought about it, the less it felt like a spontaneous decision. It felt planned, every step. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and called him. He answered after a few rings. The moment I heard airport announcements echoing in the background, my stomach tightened. "Dad?"
You busy? Where are you? Milwaukee Airport. He sounded cheerful. Emma and I are finally taking that Europe vacation we've been planning forever. I ignored everything else. Where is your mother's boat? There was silence. Not nervous silence, more like irritation, the kind people have when someone interrupts them with something they think shouldn't matter. Oh, so you found out. My heart dropped. Ethan, where is it? I sold it yesterday. He said it as casually as if he'd sold an old lawnmower. A collector gave me a fair offer. It all worked out. I couldn't speak for several seconds. Finally, I managed one sentence. You sold your mother's boat? Dad, Mom's been gone almost a year. It was sitting in the boathouse doing nothing except costing insurance money. It deserved someone who'd actually use it. I gripped the workbench to keep myself standing. That boat represented 25 years of your mother's life. It wasn't yours. He sighed loudly. Come on, Dad. I'm your only child. Eventually, everything becomes mine anyway. I just handled it early. Behind him, I heard another boarding announcement. His voice grew louder. Emma really needed this vacation. She's had a rough year since Mom passed. I bought us first-class tickets. You always taught me family comes first. I'm just putting my family first. Those words nearly broke something inside me. Emma hadn't shed a single tear during Margaret's funeral. I remember her spending more time complaining about the food than grieving my wife. Now she supposedly needed a luxury vacation to recover. It's only a boat, Ethan continued. We'll talk when we get back. Before I could answer, he hung up. I remained standing inside the empty boathouse with the phone still against my ear. But the panic was gone. Something colder had replaced it. 40 years of running a successful company teaches you to recognize when someone's explanation doesn't make sense. A first-class European vacation for 2 people might cost $40,000, maybe a little more. But 3 years earlier, Margaret and I had the boat professionally appraised for insurance. I remembered the number perfectly. Faith wasn't worth $40,000. She was worth nearly $300,000, maybe more to the right collector. Ethan had always been arrogant. He could be insensitive, selfish, entitled, but he had never been careless with money. He would never willingly throw away more than $250,000, which meant the vacation wasn't the real reason. It was only the excuse. I still had no idea what the real reason was. While I was trying to understand that, my phone rang again. Unknown number. A Wisconsin area code. I answered. Mr. Whitmore? This is Daniel Parker from Parker Classic Boat Brokerage. Your son sold us a beautiful Century Resorter yesterday. I know. I just found out. There was a pause. Then he spoke carefully. I need you to come here today. There's something we discovered inside the boat. It, I believe, belongs to you, and before anything else happens, I think you need to see it. The 45-minute drive felt like 5. I barely remembered traffic. I barely noticed the lake. My mind kept replaying the same question. Why would Ethan risk everything over a boat he knew wasn't his? By the time I reached Parker Classic Boat Brokerage, Daniel was already waiting outside. He looked like a man carrying news he wished belonged to someone else. We shook hands, and without wasting time, he led me through the workshop. Faith sat inside one of the service bays. She looked untouched. The polished mahogany still reflected the overhead lights. The chrome still shined exactly the way Margaret had left it. For one overwhelming moment, I simply rested my hand against the hull. It felt like seeing an old friend who had somehow survived a disaster. I'm sorry this happened, Daniel said quietly. I haven't released the boat. I turned toward him. What do you mean? I only paid your son a deposit. He nodded toward his office. Anything worth over $50,000 follows a strict process. The balance stays in escrow until ownership is verified. The title still lists you and your late wife. Your son presented what appeared to be a notarized power of attorney. It looked convincing, but I don't release hundreds of thousands of dollars based on paperwork alone. I verify everything. So the sale isn't complete? No, not even close. Relief washed over me for only a second. Then another realization hit. If I never signed anything— Daniel slowly nodded. Then somebody signed your name. Neither of us actually used the word. We didn't have to. Forgery. The silence between us said it well enough. I found your office number through the registration records. I intended to call before releasing the remaining funds, but then one of my mechanics removed the dashboard to inspect the wiring. He found something hidden underneath. He walked over to his workbench. A small gray fireproof lockbox sat there with its lid already open. Inside were 3 items: a flash drive, several folded documents held together by an old rubber band, and a spiral notebook. The moment I saw the handwriting on the cover, my knees almost gave out. Margaret. I'd recognize her handwriting anywhere. Daniel spoke softly. I almost never opened it. I assumed it was maintenance records, but the first page— He stopped. I knew it wasn't meant for me. With trembling hands, I picked up the notebook. The first page was dated just over 2 years earlier, several months before Margaret died. My eyes settled on the very first sentence. If someone other than me finds this, something has already gone terribly wrong. Robert deserves to know the truth. Every hair on my arm stood up. I looked back at Daniel. His expression told me he already understood how serious this had become. I need a favor. My wife spent 25 years restoring this boat. I'm asking you not to sell it. Don't move it. Don't let anyone touch it. I'll pay every storage fee. I don't care what it costs. He didn't hesitate. It isn't going anywhere. I already decided that before you arrived. He glanced toward the notebook in my hands. I don't know what's inside, but I have a feeling your wife was trying to protect something. He was right. I carried the notebook to my truck. I sat behind the steering wheel. The parking lot slowly grew dark while I turned page after page beneath the dashboard light. By the time I finished reading the first section, I realized Margaret hadn't been keeping a diary. She had been gathering evidence, and whatever she had uncovered reached far beyond the theft of her boat. I sat there for nearly an hour, reading every page Margaret had written while the sun disappeared behind the trees. By the time I reached the last page of the notebook, 2 things were painfully clear. First, Margaret had discovered that something inside Whitmore Marine Group was terribly wrong long before I ever suspected it. Second, whoever was responsible had no idea she had been documenting everything. The notebook wasn't filled with memories. It was filled with dates, dollar amounts, account numbers, vendor names, question marks written in the margins. Some names appeared only as initials, almost as if she hadn't yet been sure who she could safely accuse. One page listed payments made to a supplier I had never heard of. Another compared invoices from 2 of our marinas. Every 3 months, the expenses suddenly jumped. Then, just before the annual audit, they quietly dropped back to normal.
Margaret had circled the numbers in blue ink. Underneath, she had written, "The math never matches." On another page, she wrote, "Asked DR about these invoices today. He blamed a software problem. I don't believe him. Pulling the last 3 years of records myself." The initials DR belonged to David Reynolds. He had served as my vice president of operations for more than a decade. I had hired him personally. I trusted him. I'd watched his children grow up. He had full access to every marina we owned. The final entry stopped me cold. It had been written only 10 days before Margaret died. The words were short, direct, almost rushed. Found the overseas wire transfers. David isn't acting alone. There is a second executive signature. Need to show Robert everything on Sunday. The flash drive contains the proof. I read those 4 lines over and over. Sunday, the very morning she died, she had planned to tell me. She never got the chance. For 9 months, I had believed she left this world without any unfinished business. Now I knew the truth. She had been trying to protect me, and someone else had spent those same 9 months believing her secret had died with her. I finally looked at the flash drive. Whatever Margaret had discovered, it was inside. My phone battery was nearly dead, but I managed to make one call before it shut off. I called Laura Bennett. She had been my attorney for over 20 years. More importantly, she had been Margaret's closest friend outside our family. She answered almost immediately. "Robert, is everything all right?" "No." I told her everything. The missing boat, my conversation with Ethan, the forged documents, the notebook, the hidden lockbox, the initials, the flash drive. When I finally stopped talking, there was complete silence on the other end. Then Laura spoke. Her voice had completely changed. "Listen to me carefully. Do not call David. Do not call Ethan. Don't tell anyone at the company what you found. Tomorrow morning, we're taking that flash drive to a forensic accountant I trust. We need facts before anyone has a chance to destroy evidence." I leaned back against the truck seat. "Laura, if Margaret found all of this before she died..." She interrupted me gently. "I know exactly what you're thinking, but don't go there. Right now, all we know is that she uncovered financial fraud. We do not know anything else. Proof comes first. Anger comes later." After we ended the call, I remained alone in the parking lot for a long time. The notebook rested on the passenger seat beside me. Across the harbor, lights slowly appeared one by one as evening settled over the water. Somewhere over the Atlantic, my son and his wife were drinking champagne in first class. They believed they had gotten away with stealing Margaret's boat. What they didn't know was that the boat had been carrying something far more valuable than polished mahogany and chrome. It had been carrying the truth, and by the following morning, that truth would begin destroying everything they thought they had protected. The next morning, I was sitting inside Laura Bennett's conference room before 7 in the morning. Waiting for us was Emily Foster, a forensic accountant Laura had trusted for years. She greeted us with a firm handshake, accepted Margaret's flash drive, and connected it to a laptop she carried herself. She refused to let it leave her sight. For nearly 3 hours, she barely spoke. She simply worked, opening files, comparing spreadsheets, cross-checking transfers, occasionally writing notes in a yellow legal pad. Finally, she turned the screen toward us. "I know exactly what your wife found." My stomach tightened. "For more than 3 years," Emily said, "money has quietly left your company." She opened a series of accounting records. "The withdrawals came primarily through your Sturgeon Bay and Sister Bay marina locations. I've checked. The company barely exists. It has a mailing address, a bank account, and almost nothing else. It appears to have been created solely to receive your company's money." She opened another file. Every transfer required 2 executive approvals. The first signature appeared again and again. David Reynolds. That didn't surprise me anymore. The second did. My eyes refused to accept what I was seeing. Ethan Whitmore. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I want to be careful here," Emily said. "A signature alone doesn't automatically prove intent. Executives sometimes approve documents without reviewing every detail." I slowly shook my head. "My son doesn't. He negotiates every contract. He reads every page. When he was 26, he spent 2 weeks reviewing his own trust agreement before signing it. He doesn't put his name on anything he hasn't read." Laura gently placed a hand on my arm. "Then we keep following the evidence. We don't make assumptions. We prove everything." Some part of me still wanted to believe there had to be another explanation. That hope became smaller with every document Emily opened. By late afternoon, she had traced almost every transfer.
What emerged wasn't careless bookkeeping. It was a carefully designed system. The first withdrawals were relatively small: $5,000, $8,000, $12,000, amounts easy to overlook inside a company generating millions each year. Then, as nobody questioned the payments, the amounts grew larger: $50,000, $75,000, $100,000. Each transfer blended into legitimate operating expenses. By the time Emily finished tracing every transaction, she leaned back in her chair. The total stolen over 3 years, she glanced down at her notes, is approximately $2.3 million. The number barely registered. I was still staring at Ethan's signature. Emily wasn't finished. There's something else. She opened another document. This shell company didn't receive all the money. There was a second account. She pulled another folder from the stack. This account handled the largest international transfers. The owner wasn't David. It wasn't Ethan either. It belonged to someone else. She slid the paperwork across the table. The name nearly stopped my heart. Emma Whitmore. My daughter-in-law. Emily continued quietly. About 18 months ago, she created a holding company. She completed the registration herself. She controlled the offshore account. Based on these records, basically she personally moved the largest amounts overseas.
I leaned back without saying a word. Suddenly, every family dinner replayed inside my head. Every conversation about expensive vacations. Every complaint about not having enough money. Every casual joke about wanting a bigger house. Every fake tear at Margaret's funeral. Looking back, none of it felt genuine anymore. It all looked rehearsed. Laura slowly closed the folder. I don't think Emma simply joined this scheme. Emily nodded. I agree. From everything I've reviewed, she wasn't following Ethan. She was helping direct him. I looked down at Margaret's notebook resting beside me. She had uncovered all of this, alone, without telling anyone until she had enough proof, and she almost succeeded. Almost. My son and his wife were scheduled to return home the following afternoon. For the first time since finding the empty boathouse, I finally knew exactly how I wanted to greet them. 2 days later, Ethan and Emma pulled into my driveway just before sunset. They looked relaxed, tanned. They carried expensive luggage and shopping bags from Europe like they had just returned from the vacation of a lifetime. Neither of them had the slightest idea what had happened while they were gone. Ethan walked through the front door smiling. Dad, before we start talking about the boat, I raised one hand. Sit down. Something in my voice erased the smile from his face. Laura followed him into the kitchen, barely looking up from her phone before taking a seat beside him. The room became completely silent. I remained standing. There was a thick folder resting on the kitchen table. Inside it was Emily's forensic report. Laura sat quietly in the living room nearby, with the connecting door slightly open. At her request, every word spoken inside my kitchen would be recorded. Neither Ethan nor Emma knew she was there. I looked directly at my son. I want to discuss Harbor Point Marine Supply. The change in the room was immediate. Emma stopped scrolling. Ethan blinked. I've never heard of it. His answer came far too quickly. I slowly opened the folder. That's interesting, because your signature appears on 11 separate wire transfer authorizations sending company money to Harbor Point Marine Supply over the past 3 years. He stared at me. I continued. The total comes to approximately $2.3 million. He laughed nervously. Dad, I sign paperwork every single day. If David put something in front of me... No. My voice cut straight through his excuse. Don't blame David. You knew exactly what you were signing. He opened his mouth again. I didn't let him speak. Your mother discovered everything before she died. The color immediately drained from his face. I watched him swallow. She documented every transfer, every suspicious invoice, every account. She planned to tell me on the Sunday morning she died. The room felt colder. She never got the chance. For several long seconds, nobody said a word. Then I picked up another document. And this account, I slid it across the table toward Emma, the offshore company receiving the largest transfers. It wasn't registered by David. It wasn't registered by Ethan. It was registered by you. Emma stared at the paperwork. She didn't touch it. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The registration, the filing records, the banking information, it's all here. You created the company 18 months ago. Laura quietly walked into the kitchen carrying another folder. Neither Ethan nor Emma had noticed her that moment. She placed the second folder beside the first. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm Robert's attorney. I've reviewed every document. We've also retained a forensic accountant. She looked directly at both of them. The evidence has already been preserved. Emma's breathing became noticeably faster. Finally, she whispered, "This isn't what it looks like." I looked at her calmly before answering. "Then tell me, what does it look like?" Neither of them spoke, not one word. The silence itself became an answer. I slowly placed both hands on the table. Your mother spent 25 years restoring that boat. She trusted both of you. So did I. You forged my signature. You stole her boat. You stole from the company she helped me build. You used that money to pay for vacations while I was mourning my wife. I felt my voice begin to shake. Not from anger, from disappointment. I honestly don't know which betrayal hurts more. Ethan finally stood. "Dad, we were going to pay everything back." I stared at him. When? When you had enough? When I died? When nobody noticed? He couldn't answer. Emma suddenly burst into tears. Real tears this time. I never wanted it to go this far. I looked at her calmly before answering. It already did. I picked up the folder and handed it to Laura. Then I looked at both of them one last time. Leave. Neither of them moved. I said, "Leave my house. My attorney will contact yours. From this moment forward, everything goes through her." Ethan looked around the kitchen as if expecting someone to stop me. Nobody did. Slowly, he picked up his suitcase. Emma followed him. The front door closed behind them without another word. I stood alone in the kitchen for several minutes after they were gone. The silence felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. I believed throwing my own son out of my home would be the hardest part of this nightmare. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, David Reynolds finally told me something that made everything even darker. 3 weeks passed before I finally sat across from David Reynolds. Laura insisted she be present. Emily's complete forensic report lay on the conference table between us. Every transfer, every invoice, every signature, every offshore account. There was nowhere left to hide. I expected David to deny everything. Instead, he looked exhausted, like a man who had been carrying a weight for years and no longer had the strength to hold it.
He stared at the paperwork without touching it. Then he quietly said, "I've been wondering when this day would come." I didn't answer. He took a slow breath. 4 years ago, Ethan walked into my office. He'd just been promoted to regional director. He said he deserved more. He believed he was underpaid. He kept talking about how one day the company would belong to him anyway. I told him that wasn't my decision. David rubbed both hands across his face. A month later, he came back. This time, he had an entire plan. He'd already created the fake vendor. He said the amounts would stay small. He promised nobody would ever notice. I should have walked straight into your office. I should have told you everything. His voice cracked. "Why?" I finally asked. He lowered his eyes. "Because he offered me a percentage, and once I accepted, I became just as guilty as he was." The room fell silent. Laura never interrupted. She simply listened. David looked directly at me for the first time. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just telling you the truth." I leaned forward. "My wife discovered everything." His expression changed instantly. "What? 10 days before she died, she found the invoices, the wire transfers, the offshore accounts. She wrote every detail in a notebook. She planned to tell me that Sunday morning. David's face turned completely pale. I swear to you, I never knew. I had no idea Margaret found anything. I watched him carefully. Then I asked the question that haunted me ever since reading her notebook. Did Ethan know? David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the table for nearly a minute. Finally, he spoke. I don't know, but, he swallowed hard, about 3 weeks before your wife passed away, Ethan suddenly became impatient. He started pushing larger transfers. He wanted everything moved faster. At the time, I thought he was simply getting greedier. David looked up at me. Now, I'm not so sure. I've wondered every day since you called me. Maybe he realized Margaret was getting close. Maybe he didn't. I honestly don't know. Those words stayed with me long after the meeting ended. I wanted to believe my son wasn't capable of something that cruel. I wanted to believe he had never suspected his own mother was uncovering the fraud. But no matter how many times I searched for another explanation, I couldn't find one. That night, I barely slept. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. If Ethan realized his mother was about to expose everything, did he decide to stop, or did he simply decide to steal faster before she could tell me? I have never found an answer to that question, and maybe I never will. 9 days after discovering the empty boathouse, Laura submitted Emily's forensic report to federal investigators. The moment they saw international wire transfers flowing through offshore accounts, the case became much larger than our company. In days, every corporate account Ethan and Emma could access was frozen. Laura immediately removed Ethan from every executive position inside Whitmore Marine Group. She also began legal proceedings to remove him as a beneficiary of both the family trust and my future estate. David resigned before I had the opportunity to fire him. Once federal investigators contacted him, he cooperated completely. Laura later told me that his cooperation would likely reduce the prison sentence he was facing. Ethan and Emma hired one of the best attorneys they could find. For about a week, their lawyer insisted everything was simply an accounting misunderstanding. That argument disappeared the moment prosecutors presented the evidence. 11 wire transfers carrying Ethan's signature, the forged power of attorney used to steal Faith, the offshore company registered by Emma, and Margaret's handwritten notebook recovered directly from the hidden compartment inside her boat. The investigation was no longer based on accusations. It was based on proof. 6 months later, the case finally reached federal court. Those 6 months changed me. Every morning I looked in the mirror and saw a man who seemed years older than the one who had walked into an empty boathouse that Monday. David Reynolds accepted a plea agreement before the trial began. He admitted his role. He cooperated fully. He turned over every document investigators requested.
During his sentencing hearing, he looked across the courtroom at me only once. Without making a sound, he mouthed 2 simple words. I'm sorry. For a moment, I believed he meant them. It didn't erase what he had done, but I believed them. Ethan and Emma chose a different path. They pleaded not guilty. The trial lasted 6 days. Emily Foster spent nearly 2 full days explaining financial records to the jury. She carefully walked them through every invoice, every transfer, every shell company, every forged document, one transaction at a time. Then came Margaret's notebook. The prosecutor held it in his hands with extraordinary care. Page after page appeared on the courtroom screens. Her handwriting, her notes, her questions, her final entry. The jury sat in complete silence while the prosecutor read aloud her last words. Need to show Robert everything on Sunday. Those words echoed through the courtroom. She never got that Sunday.
I attended every single day of the trial. Ethan never looked at me, not once. Emma looked my way only on the final afternoon. There was no anger in her face, no sorrow, only disbelief, as if she still couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart. The jury spent less than 5 hours deliberating. When they returned, every person in the courtroom stood. The foreperson handed the verdict to the judge. One by one, the guilty verdicts were read. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, forgery. Every count, guilty. A few weeks later came sentencing. The judge described the crimes as calculated, deliberate, planned over several years. David Reynolds received 3 years in federal prison after cooperating with investigators. Ethan received 7 years. Emma received 9 years. The judge explained that although Emma had joined the operation later, she had personally organized the offshore companies that moved most of the stolen money overseas. That made her role especially significant. I watched my son stand in a courtroom wearing the same navy blue suit I had bought him for his college graduation. Then I listened as a stranger informed him exactly how many years he would spend in federal prison. There are moments in life that words cannot fully describe. That was one of them. The court eventually recovered nearly $2 million from frozen accounts before the remaining money disappeared overseas. I could have returned those funds directly to the company. Instead, I chose something Margaret would have appreciated. Working with Laura and several physicians from our community, I established the Margaret Whitmore Foundation. Its purpose was simple: to support brain aneurysm research, to fund early detection programs, to help families avoid the same silent tragedy that had taken Margaret from me without warning. Her name now appears inside hospitals instead of hidden bank accounts. That felt like the only ending worthy of her. Back at Whitmore Marine Group, I ordered a complete independent audit of every marina we owned. Half of our senior management was replaced. This time, I didn't hire impressive executives from outside the company. I promoted the people who had earned my trust over decades. Dock workers, mechanics, service managers, men and women who had spent 20 years repairing boats instead of manipulating spreadsheets. The company became smaller, leaner, stronger. I finally understood something Margaret had always believed: character matters more than resumes. People still ask whether I've forgiven Ethan. The truth is, I don't know. He writes to me from prison. I've read every letter. I've answered none of them. Maybe one day I will. Maybe I won't. Some wounds heal on their own schedule. About a month after the trial ended, I drove back to Parker Classic Boat Brokerage. Daniel had kept his promise. Despite receiving several generous offers for collectors, he had refused to sell Faith. He simply smiled when I arrived. I figured she belonged at home. I paid him for storing the boat all those months. Then I hooked the trailer to my truck and brought Faith back where she belonged. Back to the same boathouse, back onto the same cradle where Margaret had left her. These days, most evenings end the same way. I carry a cup of coffee down to the boathouse. I sit inside Faith. I run my hand across the polished mahogany Margaret spent 25 years restoring, and I remember her exactly as she deserves to be remembered. Not as another victim in a criminal case, but as the remarkable woman who quietly uncovered the truth before anyone else did. She simply wasn't given enough time to tell me. Bringing her boat home, creating a foundation in her name, protecting the company she helped build. Those things will never replace her, but they allowed me to finish the work she started. If there's one lesson this entire journey taught me, it's this: betrayal rarely arrives wearing the face of a stranger. Sometimes it smiles across your own dinner table. Sometimes it grows quietly for years without making a sound. And sometimes the person who saves everything isn't the loudest voice in the room. It's the patient one who keeps paying attention while everyone else looks away.